Welcome back to another edition of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Our mission is to bring you great interviews with preppers from around the world so you can be better informed and better prepared for everything from a hurricane to the end of the world as we know it. I've been purchasing gold and silver from JM Bullion since before they were a show sponsor because they have the lowest price of any dealer I know of. JM Bullion now offers free shipping on all orders, and Prepper Recon listeners will get $5 off any order over $300. Just go to jmbullion.com and use coupon code PR5 at checkout. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, campingsurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, water filters, bug out bags, and first aid kits. Use coupon code PREPPERRECON for 5% off your entire order at campingsurvival.com. Today's guest is David Zuniga of TaxHonestyPrimer.com. David, welcome back on the show.
Thanks, Mark. It's good to be back with you.
Oh, absolutely. It's good to have you back on. So, tax season's here again. Have you filed yet?
No. I don't file federal tax returns. I've been a conscientious, law-abiding non-taxpayer for 15 years.
And doesn't the IRS give you grief about that?
No, not grief, really. Till about 5 years ago when they apparently gave up, they were like, what would I compare them to? Pesky vinyl siding salesmen. They would send hopeful invoices or idle threats or evasive non-responses over the years, but not really grief. I always responded firmly, but cordially by certified mail. I'd put the burden of proof back on them for their assertions or for their claims, and sometimes I'd reprint my entire Tax Honesty Primer website, which you can see on the site there. I would just cut and paste the whole thing and send them that. Other times when I had the time and money to do it that way, I would reprint packages, anything from 3 or 4 pages long to over, I think one time I ended up sending over 250 pages of documentation, just inundating them with demonstrating that according to the tax code and the Supreme Court and federal court rulings and the IRM, their internal revenue manual, their internal operating manual, I never owed a tax, and their operations manual stipulates that they have to show the burden is on them to show that I owe a tax. So, anyway, for instance, in their IRM, their Internal Revenue Manual, their rule book, Article 4, Section 10, Subsection 7, Paragraph 1, it reads like this. It's an overview. It says, examiners are responsible for determining the correct tax liability as prescribed by the IRC, the code. It is imperative that examiners can identify the applicable law, correctly interpret its meaning in light of congressional intent, and in a fair and impartial manner, correctly apply the law based on the facts and circumstances of the case. So when you ask one of your IRS employees for the law that they're applying to try to collect something from you, they need, by their operating manual, it is imperative, it says, that examiners can identify the applicable law. So they have to actually show you that section of law. Their operating manual doesn't give them any other option. They have to do that. So for about a decade, until they gave up, they stopped bugging me. Every time I demanded that one of my employees there at IRS answer me with law, they refused every single time. So, I basically told them to pound sand, and that's what they've done.
And you referred to them as one of your employees, and I think
I think your employees too.
I think that people forget that. I think that largely people are intimidated by the IRS, especially since they've been weaponized. You know, we're all aware of the conservative groups being targeted by the IRS, and doesn't that have a chilling effect on freedom?
What do you think?
I think it does.
Yeah, it does. But, yeah, I mean, people are scared of the agency.
And they certainly don't think of them as being somebody that works for them anymore.
Right. They don't.
And now we're hearing about IRS agents. They're being trained with what the mainstream media would call assault weapons. We would probably call them battle rifles, but that's what they say, assault weapons, and they call them high capacity magazines. What I think a 30 round magazine is a standard capacity magazine for a battle rifle, but they would term them as assault weapons with high capacity magazines. I was under the impression that IRS agents were mostly accountants, but this recent news makes them sound more like a bunch of mafia collection thugs.
Yeah, that's what they are. Mafia collection thugs. Actually, Congress has been a criminal operation for about 6 generations now. And only us, we the people, can end this hijacking. Last June, for instance, you talk about the assault weapon thing. Last June, I found an article in Politico where South Carolina Congressman, I think he's a Republican, Jeff Duncan, was acting all flustered when he happened to see, I don't know where he was, but he happened to see IRS agents training with AR-15s, and he freaks out. And this, I'll quote what he said. "I think Americans raise eyebrows when you tell them that IRS agents are training with a type of weapon that has standoff capability. It's not like they're carrying a sidearm and they knock on someone's door and say, 'You're evading your taxes,'" unquote. Now, sidearm, that criminal puppet, he's dead wrong. Mark, okay, if you go to the IRC, the Internal Revenue Code section 7608A1 says it stipulates that only IRS personnel who are engaged in subtitle E enforcement, that means alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or explosives cases, only those agents are authorized to carry any kind of firearm, sidearm or any arm. They can't carry any firearm when they visit your home or your workplace unless you're involved in the manufacture or sale or whatever repair of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or explosives. In any other case, if an IRS person comes to your door armed, they're engaging in a felony just like any other armed thug at your door would be. I mean, this is, this congressman, this supposedly conservative politician is really putting on a show, Mark. And I mean, he was acting very upset, just like they act very upset about the size and complexity of the code. They wrote it. They're the ones that wrote it, and they try to act, they do this good cop, bad cop thing with the IRS, where, they act all incensed about it. That's baloney. They're the ones that send the Internal Revenue Service agent out to collect that money, lawlessly and, from you. So, if they act all upset about these guys having, AR-15s or whatever, they're not really upset. They're actually quite glad. But they want you to think that IRS has all kinds of power that it just doesn't have. This is all fraud. It's all bluster. The emperor is naked. The IRS doesn't have any teeth. I'm one of only 67 million people that doesn't file. Now, I don't know how many of those 67 million estimated non-filers are, should be filing or think they should be filing or whatever. But I can tell you that the IRS has no teeth as long as you do as I do, obey the law, tell the truth, and force them to obey the law and tell the truth also. The latest, last year, if you remember, the latest round of scandals, and Congress loves to do this. They hold these hearings, and it's all so fake. It's theater, they hold these hearings, and they bring up an IRS person and grill them like crazy and all that. These are their bag men. They don't want to hurt the IRS. They want to keep that $3.9 trillion coming in every year, and about close to $2 trillion of that is individual income taxes. So they sure don't want to kill that goose that lays that golden egg. It's all fake. So, but isn't it something that last year when it came out that the IRS had spent something like $50 million for 1 year worth of, junkets and dinners and Christmas gifts and all this stuff. 50 million. I mean, this isn't just an embarrassment, Mark. I mean, this is shameless corruption. It's organized crime operating right in front of our face. And I just won't financially support it. I just won't. For 15 years I haven't, and I don't intend to.
Now, how do you determine if you should be filing under current tax law?
Well, that's what my website does. It walks you through the position that you should always obey the law and tell the truth. And then you make them obey the law and tell the truth. And then you find that really most people are being duped, they're being defrauded, and frightened into filing. They never owed, they never had to file. Most people don't have to file. There are there's about 125 categories and activities that are taxable that I can find in the law. So there are plenty that are taxable, but most of us, probably 95% of us, never had a requirement to file. And here's the easiest way, and again, I walk you through it step by step on taxhonestyprimer.com. If the Supreme Court has said this several times, has ruled this several times, and Sutherland's rules of statutory construction rules this same thing. The basic legal idea is a Latin term, let me remember it, inclusio unius est exclusio alterius. That means to include one is to exclude all others. That's a basic legal idea, legal tenet. So if you write a law and you include somebody in that law, let's say, pick one, nuclear power plant construction. If anybody who picks up the federal law that has to do with nuclear power plant construction has to know that law, has to read it, has to apply it to everything they do while they're building, designing and building a nuclear power plant. Everybody else can act, and this is just common sense. Everybody else can act like if that law doesn't exist, right? Because you don't build or design nuclear power plants. Same thing with lots of stuff that there are federal laws for. If you fly commercially, if you're a commercial pilot, or if you're a commercial airframe and power plant mechanic, there's a whole big fat set of federal aviation regulations that apply to you. So you need to worry about those. And if you break those rules, you need to worry about it. But if you don't, if you're not a commercial airline pilot, or if you're not an airframe and power plant mechanic, you don't need to worry about those laws. Like they don't exist. Okay. So for most Americans, I know this is hard to believe, but if you go to my website and you go through it slowly, and it'll take a couple of hours to read it, but it's taken me years to put this together. It took me about 7 years to compile everything, and then I guess I spent another 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years refining it, and I continually do that. And I went through a lot of websites that are now gone, that a lot of them had just absolute garbage on them. All kinds of ideas and theories that I couldn't find anywhere in law or regulations or anything. So I just go to the law, and I go to the regulations, and I go to the Supreme Court rulings, and I go to actual tax cases that were decided by juries, and I use that. Just stuff that anybody can go see, not theories or, ideas or whatever I, feel bitterly about or whatever. So it's not rocket science, but it is kind of like you're dealing with tax law, and so it takes a while to get it. And that's why I wrote that. That's why I compiled that website. So people could they could buy a copy of the tax code, and I show you where to get it. I've got a link to it. It costs about, $130 or something. I don't sell them, but I take you to that link. And you buy a code, and then I show you which, not on this website, I have another website linked there called A Tax Code for All. And it shows you every line in the 10,000 page tax code to highlight. And there's only about 125 lines. And I show you every page, every line that you need to highlight and mark and tab so that you'll know where to go back and refer and see that really, really, truly, these are the people that it says must, it says shall, it says will. In other words, establishing a legal duty in page after page after page of the code. So if you see that a bunch of people have a duty established in that code, that's who the code applies to. It can't just apply to everyone. It only applies to those to whom it refers. Now, if it didn't specifically refer to all of those 125 different activities and domicile classes and stuff, if it didn't do that, if it just said everybody owes, well, then that would be different. But in 1894, the Supreme Court ruled that it can't just say everybody owes, because that would violate the uniformity clause of the Constitution, and so they couldn't do that. So in the Pollock case in 94, the Supreme Court forced the Congress to give back what it had collected in taxes when it had under its old universal taxing act, what it had collected. The court essentially ruled they had to give that money back. So it cannot, the Congress cannot just say everyone owes a tax. You can't do that. That's what the Constitution establishes. So the code is kind of like a Byzantine puzzle. It's meant to be that way. It's hard to get through it, but I kind of help you get into it and see what it doesn't say, and I take you through all the cases, and I show you what the courts have said, and it's really not that hard. Once you do it this way, it's really not that hard to see why as of 2005, an estimated 67 million people aren't filing anymore, why that's the case. And like I say, a lot of those people probably don't need to file, maybe tens of millions of them, but tens of millions of them are just like the ones who now file. And we don't file. And we don't have to.
Now, the top tier federal tax rate is now 39.6%. And then most of us are also getting soaked for another 15% by Medicare and Social Security as well. After that, we pay property tax, sales tax, and capital gains tax if we're actually able to save anything and eke out any gains. Where's all this money going?
Good question. I know that over 74% of it is going to illegal federal activities. Back in 2011 with America Again, we were looking at the 2011 budget, which I don't recall if it was ever actually passed. I don't think it was. But based on the budget amounts, less than 26% of everything that the federal government is doing today is authorized by the U.S. Constitution. 74%, almost 3/4 of it, is unlawful. It violates the highest law in America. So, by the way, much higher than the federal tax code. So when people say, oh, you don't pay your taxes, you don't pay your fair share, I say, whoa, wait. Let's start with big stuff. Then we'll get to you're talking about little stuff right now. I'm some little guy that doesn't pay taxes because I don't have to. And I can prove to you that I don't have to. But before even doing that, let's look at what Congress right now spends. About $4 trillion, 3.8, 3.9 trillion. Let's look at what they're authorized by law to spend. It's those 17 services that we authorize, we enumerate in Article 1, Section 8. You take those, and even with the huge bloated military that we have that's absolutely unconstitutional, even with that, you end up with less than half a trillion, well, between less than half and 750 billion, which is what, 3/4 of a trillion. Let's say 1 trillion, but it's not 3.9 trillion. So Congress is collecting right now, is skimming off the payroll accounts of all of America 4 or 5 times what it should be receiving for its lawful duties, for the things that we told it needed to do for us. So why in the world is anybody saying, you're not paying your fair share? They're already taking in far, far, far more money than they should. Now, when people say we want to shrink government, you're not going to shrink anything in government until you take its money away. If you've ever worked for or with any agency, local, school district, county, state, federal, you understand they will never stop doing something until the money dries up. They will always want more money every year, and they will do more and more things, whether they're authorized to do them or not, as long as the money's there. So if you're giving, if taxpayers today are giving them 4 to 5 times what they should lawfully have, why on earth should anybody be whining about some of us who don't file and don't pay because we never owed it and don't have to by law? Why should they be whining about that?
And even though you didn't pay taxes, you still got soaked for nearly 10% of the value of the dollars that you have saved through quantitative easing last year. We printed over $1 trillion worth of money of what they claim on quantitative easing, which we know doesn't even take into account for the interest, and I'm sure there's probably some other off-balance sheet stuff that we don't know about completely.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to go there, but there is so much that's unlawful in Washington, D.C., that, like I say, this issue, this April 15th issue, it comes up every year because taxpayers get very exercised running, having that as their annual thing, as their calendar. It's like running on a hamster wheel. But, for instance, people say, well, what about the 17 or 16 or whatever trillion dollar, national debt? And how much, is it going to take to pay that off? How much would we have to pay if, for Congress to have enough to pay that off? How would we do that? Well, number one, that's a fake number. At present, Congress's total unfunded liabilities, which is basically like a credit card bill that you or I would have, promises that they've made, that have to get paid out. Total right now is about 121.6, let's say $122 trillion. And it doesn't matter that this is mostly socialist, illegal stuff that's nowhere authorized by the Constitution. It's there anyway. Too bad. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, federal unemployment compensation, federal prescription drug programs, huge unconstitutional military industry and foreign aid, interest on the national debt, and on past war expenditures. You add it all up, it's not 16 or 17 trillion. It's over 120 trillion. So if you think, okay, how much would we have to pay that off? Okay, take the entire GNP, everything that every American makes for 8 years, and that's what it would take to pay off that debt. And that.
But a third of GDP is government spending.
I know. And that's with Congress ending every federal expenditure. In other words, close everything federal tomorrow and take every dollar that every American individual and company makes for the next 8 years, and you'll pay that off. Now, I mean, come on. Do the math. It's never going to happen. We're never going to get out of this debt. And in fact, there's we'll get into that. But I mean, it's just impossible to look at what is happening right now and say, this is a soluble issue. It's not.
Now, wasn't our country founded originally because we were tired of being overtaxed? How did we get from there to here?
Yeah, that's, yeah, that, stupidity. I think that since Lincoln's time, Mark, Washington, D.C. has demonstrated, 5 generations of clueless Americans, how it can just keep kicking the can down the road. And you mentioned quantitative easing, which is really it angers me to hear them use that term for counterfeiting, because that's all it is. If you read the 1871 legal tender cases, Knox v. Lee and I don't remember the second one right now, but the 2 cases in 1871 that were decided, unfortunately, that counterfeiting was okay. That ever since that time, they counterfeit paper after they call it legal, and the Constitution clearly says that that's illegal. Only gold and silver. For 225 years, the law has said only gold and silver are lawful U.S. money. Nothing else is lawful U.S. money. But Congress, starting with the 37th Congress, 152 years ago, in the fog of war, when things were falling all over, the Republic was falling apart, and that was all by design. They use wars for just that purpose, to get you, so they can kick the can down the road while everybody's looking at this war and trying to pull together to win this war. So even though the law has always said that only gold and silver is lawful U.S. money, they did this for the necessity of war. We had to pay the troops and all this stuff. And so the 37th Congress said, well, we'll just counterfeit. We'll do quantitative easing starting in 1862. And Lincoln, the other puppet, says, sure, I'll sign it. And after the war, U.S. Supreme Court comes out with Hepburn v. Griswold and says, no, that's wrong. That's counterfeiting. You can't do that. Greenbacks are no good. Got to go back to gold and silver. And that didn't last 1 year, because on the day, literally the day that the U.S. Supreme Court decided Hepburn, on that same day, the bankers had Ulysses Grant put 2 new members on the court, both banker puppets. And those members, within 1 year, they doubled down. They brought 2 cases, and they said, no. We're going to overturn ourselves here, and we're going to say it is okay to counterfeit. So it's massive fraud. It's counterfeiting and conspiracy, and it's abuse of office, and it's lots of other felonies. But since all three branches of our federal servant are in it together, think of it as checks and balances in reverse. I mean, they're all making sure, the 3 of them are making sure that they're all covered, and we have no way of, so far, we had not had any way of reversing this. America Again, what we talked about last time I was on your show, America Again and the America Again indictment engine is the first way that I know of to go in there and correct this, to stop the crime, to bust the cartel puppets so that they can't do this anymore.
But then historically, haven't financial markets always come together and done an accounting of every fiat currency throughout time? And
they always have, and they will. They'll do this. They'll do it again. Washington, D.C. is going to face judgment. I mean, Libya, if you remember, Muammar Gaddafi, he tried in his own way. Iraq tried. You saw what happened to Hussein when he tried. to test this fake U.S. dollar. China doesn't dare do it right now, but they could someday.
Aren't they isn't China and Russia, aren't they right now discussing trading oil on some other currency besides the dollar?
No, they already have. I mean, China, Brazil, India, a bunch of them already have. Iran, a bunch of them have.
But they're a little bigger than Libya and
right,
and Iraq.
Right. Yeah, they're getting the bilateral trade deals that don't involve U.S. dollars anymore, which was the only way that you could do, especially oil deals. You could ever do oil deals since 1944. That is now coming to an end. So yeah, but I mean, look at the size of China's actual economy compared to ours, and it's still, people are still saying, that won't do it. Well, eventually, crime catches up with the bad guys. If you're running a counterfeiting ring and everybody's taking your fake money, your fake currency, whatever you want to call it, and all of a sudden, one of the bigger players says, you know what? No, I want real money. Well, eventually, the House of Cards comes down, and our U.S. Congress, which is organized crime, it's going to be like a suddenly unemployed consumer that has a huge mortgage and 3 car loans and 8 maxed out credit cards, and it's not going to be pretty.
And then when the 16th Amendment was originally proposed shortly before 1913, the idea was that we'd have about a 2% income tax on income earners that made more than $4,000 a year, which at that time I think would have probably been equivalent to around $100,000 now. So right. Most of the people were probably not really up in arms because they didn't really think that it was going to affect them, and it was really only going to be 2% of what they considered ultra rich. So that didn't really that was no skin off of their toe. So I think that was probably a really good example of why our founding fathers wanted this to be a republic rather than a democracy, because isn't the definition of a democracy 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner?
On what's to eat. Yeah. I think the best book that sort of outlines how this all went down in 1909 through 1913, how they got that law passed. And I'm talking about the instituting the Internal Revenue Service and the code, is Phil Hart's book. It's called, I'm trying to remember, I have it linked on a tax honesty primer. It's called Constitutional Income. Do You Have Any? By Phil Hart. Now, Phil he's an engineer like me. He used to be an Idaho state congressman for years. And that book is now on its 3rd printing. It's about, I think it's a little over 400 pages. It's not a small book, but he goes through every memorandum, every note, everything, all the internal stuff that went down as they did this deal. What they did is they sold it as a tax to soak the rich. Like you said, it was only going to be a very small tax, and it was only on the very rich. And what did most Americans? Typical. It's what politicians always do. You get the people up in arms, envious of the upper few percent. And if you can get that envy really working, all of a sudden you've got a deal. And that's what they did, in 1913. But the damage was already done, and it was really done ever since Lincoln's time.
And I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there listening that are looking to quit getting pilfered by the IRS. What steps would you recommend for them to take to get started and into being a lawful non-tax participant?
Law-abiding non-taxpayer, I call them. Well, I describe it all on the site, a tax honesty primer. If it's just taxhonestyprimer.com, all one word, tax honesty, and then primer, like primer. all one word. So you want to know about the site. Let me give you first the legal context that I think anybody ought to just consider before they say, oh, should I just stop filing? And should I take on the IRS? First, look at the bigger picture. I've already said a little bit about that. But even, you know what, even before that, your prepper community for sure will get this part. Even before that, we need to be aware that this Great Depression too, that we've kind of hinted at here in the last few minutes, this collapse is going to make this whole IRS discussion irrelevant. So that's the first thing that people need. Don't get too exercised this year over your tax stuff. If you've been paying, allowing them to skim your bank account for all these years, don't freak out this year too much, because this might be a very irrelevant discussion by the end of 2014. Things could I really feel like, as much as any year that I've been alive, this year is a very likely time for the collapse to come. And when it does, this whole subject will be irrelevant. But, 152 years of counterfeiting, that's a long time to be fooling people into accepting worthless paper as money. And so it's gone on so long. And so the overall context in which we should be viewing the Internal Revenue Service, whether they're partying at $50 million a year or not, the whole context we ought to be looking at that agency through is the illegality of what Congress is doing, not how they're skimming your payroll account to do it. It's the illegality of what they are doing to begin with. That's the way you need to look at them as the defendant, as the criminal. Don't think of yourself as a criminal, possible criminal for doing something that you perfectly righteously can do. Look at them first, at what they're doing. So, I think that the Great Depression, 80 years ago was kind of a pre-tremor of the coming collapse, because, back then a lot of Americans lost everything. Some of them committed suicide. But that depression wasn't anything compared to the one that's coming. The numbers this time, they're huge. The numbers of people that are going to be affected around the world just dwarfs the size of the affected population back in the 1930s. So tens of millions of Americans are going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose their careers. It's going to be over. They won't be able to go back to it. They're going to lose the customer base they have just from one week to the next. Or certainly within a month, within about 30 days, life as we know it is going to collapse to a kind of life. And I know the prepper community's been talking about this and thinking about this for years. Not all of us have, though, and so I'm new to prepping, and so I'm kind of seeing just the sheer immensity, and obviously your books really helped me to actually live it out. By the second book, I'm going, wow, this is so real. This is what it's going to be like. So, and again, I'm basically plugging your books, Mark.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
They're so, how can I say this? Not accurately. Well, yeah, accurately, but so realistically written that as you're reading about the different interplay between the characters and the different stuff that happens day to day, it's real. It's very, very real. I was on a job site down in Harlingen, Texas a few months ago, and it really reminded me of your first book. I hadn't read the second one yet. We had about 6 trucks worth of material that all arrived one morning, and they were all queued up. So I had all the drivers come into the job site office, and we're talking. I'm talking to all these truck drivers while the forklift operators are offloading all the material. And we get to talking about what's going on in America. And these are truckers. These are the guys that make stuff go from point A to point B, that basically make America run every day. And I asked them, I started kind of pitching this thing at them, about your book, about the whole thesis of how the collapse, what'll happen and how it'll happen. And these guys were basically agreeing that, if diesel goes to $8 or $9, that's it. Game over. I can't roll. This trucker, the average trucker, he's out of business. He can't take things from point A to point B. Game over. So people just, it's really going to be something. I mean, I really, anyway, Great Depression 2 can hit at any time, right?
Absolutely. And then that'll be the end of being able to, for cities to be a habitable area, because in Great Depression 1, we only had 10% of the population living in cities, and we had 90% of the population living in rural areas. So while they were poor and while they didn't have any money, most people had a little land, or they had family with land, and if they had a fistful of seeds, and they could eat by for 1 year, they could plant something and they could grow something. They could eat their own food the following year. These kids now, there was a guy and I can't remember his name. He's a chef. His first name is Jamie, and I can't remember his last name. But he did a television show in West Virginia, and he went into the schools there. And this is West Virginia is a very rural state.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he went into, I think it was Huntington, West Virginia, and he went into the schools there, and he held up a tomato, and he asked the kids, and they were probably third or fourth grade kids. They weren't kindergartners. He said, "Can anybody tell me what this is?" Hardly anybody knew what it was. And he held up a potato. They didn't know what it was. They knew what potato. It was all about. They knew what French fries were. They knew what tater tots were. They knew what ketchup was. They had no idea that ketchup came from tomatoes. They had no idea that it was a plant-based food.
Yeah, isn't that something?
And the nutritional standards, because the reason he was there is I think that it was the most overweight city in America. I think at that particular time was Huntington, West Virginia. And most of these kids, the things they were eating in school was horrible, and most of the food in their homes was ready-made, pop in the microwave foods, and it was horrible. So, I don't know if you've read James Wesley Rawls' books, but he kind of has this thought of people pouring out into the countryside from the cities to go and sort of rape and pillage. And I think that may happen on some extent, but I think a lot of those people wouldn't have any idea what to do if they got out to a farm and they found a field of corn. I don't think they would have I don't even think they'd know how to shuck it and boil it to prepare it to even be able to eat.
I agree.
So I think that I don't think the government's just going to let go. I portray that in the book that the federal government of the part of America that doesn't break away, they do everything they can to try to pilfer the remaining bits of wealth away from the public, and I think that we'll see that.
I think that's another very accurate depiction in your books, and you're going to have that urban-rural divide, and it's going to become even worse. And like you say, the ones who do stay under the aegis of governments are going to be, they're going to be. Anyway, this April 15th discussion will become moot for a lot of us. And so the longer-term context, I think, has to be, we need to bust the world's largest crime cartel, and we need to forget about income tax. It's a fake debate. It's been a fake debate ever since they started it in 1913. So for 15 years, I've been off that hamster wheel, like an estimated 67 million other non-filers. I keep everything I earn. I obey the law. I tell the truth. I make my IRS employees do the same thing. So I'd like your listeners to just stop being so afraid of your employees. stop being so afraid that you won't even go out and spend $135 on a single volume tax code, or $20 on Phil Hart's book, Constitutional Income, Do You Have Any? Or so afraid that you won't go to my free website, taxhonestyprimer.com, and learn. Just learn what the scam is, how it works, why you never owed, why you thought you owed. Just learn. It's free. I don't charge anything, and I don't take any donations or anything. So, but let me mention now the larger context about taxes and about the Internal Revenue Service. I gave our America Again website last time, the first time I was on with you. I'd like to give it again. It's AmericaAgainNow.com. AmericaAgainNow, one word, .com. And if you go there's a tab up on top that says blog, click on that, and then go to the blog articles and kind of scroll down until you get to one that's called Can Americans Stop the Cartels? ? And Mark, I hope you'll find that post and that particular article, Can Americans Stop the Cartels? I'll send you the link to it. I hope that you'll put that link on your site also for this discussion, because as far as I'm concerned, April 15th will go here in a few days, and it'll be passed, and everybody goes back to their lives and forgets about income taxes again. And, they allow their payroll checks to be skimmed, and everybody just goes back and forgets things. So in that article, though, let me tell you what that article does. It's I think the most important article I've ever written. First, I define what a cartel is. And I explain that ever since Lincoln was president, Washington, D.C. has been just like the governments of Mexico or Russia or whatever, Italy, whatever, under cartel control. Cartels control the government. The people don't. They just think they do. So then I list all of the major industries that are operating cartels, U.S.-based cartels. Now, these people, Mark, as you well know, these people write our laws. Congress doesn't write the laws, hasn't written the laws for a long time. So not only do they write the laws, but in regulatory law, there's a phrase, deep capture, and that just means that the agency that's supposed to be regulated by that regulation puts its own people in the regulatory agency that's supposed to be overseeing its industry. That's called deep capture. There's a great law professor at University of Missouri, Kansas City. His name's Bill Black, William K. Black. And he wrote a great book called The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. And he coined a term, talking about deep capture, he coined a different term. He calls it control fraud. But it's the same mechanism. Bill Black used to be a federal prosecutor and bank regulator. And he knows all about how the banks screw the people, how it's the most underhanded criminal operation is the banking industry. And so Bill Black coined that term, control fraud, which is the same thing as deep capture. It means that Congress acts like, when they're holding these hearings, these congressional hearings with these regulatory bureaucrats, and they're screaming at them. Like I said a minute ago about IRS, when they have IRS hearings, you need to understand that is complete, shameless, utter theater. It isn't real. They're faking it. They know that those guys, if they're talking about banking, that regulator sitting there is a former banker. He will probably be a future banker. And right now he's a regulator regulating his buddies in the banking. And it's that way in every industry. If they're talking about, chemical or, petroleum or energy or transportation or whatever, whatever it is, deep capture has made it such that the cartels have made it such that there is no actual control anymore by the people of anything that's being done to us, either by government or by large corporations. And this didn't begin with Obama. The cartels started, Alexander Hamilton, first Treasury Secretary. He was a plant. He was a bankster plant. He tried to foist, his plan was called the British Plan, in the Constitutional Convention in 1787. He was there trying to push that British plan through, for his banking buddies from the very beginning. His handlers wanted to wrangle control of the New World by capturing our money, and they had success, on and off, but Thomas Jefferson was constantly raising, red flags and, raising the alarm against them. And then, Andrew Jackson kind of totally stopped them for a while in the late 1830s. But then, the banksters, and I call them the alpha wolf of the cartels. They're the top cartel of all the cartels. They ginned up that war, Lincoln's War, under pretense of ending slavery, and then, amidst that shock and awe, they had their puppets in the 37th Congress pass the Legal Tender Act, and basically that's just a counterfeiting plan in open violation of the Constitution. And they passed it in 1862, and since then we have had counterfeit money. It's just nothing but fake money. So again, it's very, very difficult to beat them, but America again is a plan for the American people to beat them, to beat the cartels. So first we describe what the cartels are, and then the second part of the article gives you 10 solutions that have been proposed to beat the cartels over the past 150 years. All of those solutions have failed. Armed revolution, secession, nullification, a third political party, anarchy, abolishing all government, the institutions like Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, all the single issue nonprofit things that say, we can fix things. What are some of the others? The Tea Party, a con, amending the Constitution by using an Article 5 Convention of the States. That's a big hot one these days. A shadow government, and there's several plans for shadow government out there. And the last one is a coup, overthrow the government. Go to Washington and overthrow the government. And there's a big plan for May 16th called, Operation American Spring. It's a former CIA, agent who is also former, military and very well loved man and Christian guy and everything, is planning this crazy coup for May 16th. He wants to get 10 million people in Washington and go remove all the liberals and forcibly put, conservatives. Anyway, crazy stuff. So we go through those 10 different ideas that have been tried and why they don't work. Why these things either won't work or should not work, because they're worse than the solution's worse than the problem. So, and then at the end of the article, I describe America again and why I think it'll succeed where the other proposed solutions have failed. Basically because it's, it's just we the people enforcing the Constitution, and because it's directed by the people and not by politicians at any level. So, so anyway, that's the larger context into which the law enforcement context that you have to look at when you're thinking, you're kind of chicken and you start thinking, wow, should I become a non-taxpayer, law-abiding? Before you start reading a tax honesty primer, I just ask that you look at the larger context and understand that Congress has used that terror operation, and that's what it is. It operates exactly like every terror operation does. It uses coercion, it uses fear, and it's a deep, visceral fear that every taxpayer has. Nobody is more feared in the United States by the average taxpayer than the IRS. It is the most feared organization. I mean, even the Chinese army, the Russian nuclear missiles are not feared as much by every American taxpayer as the IRS is feared. So there's about, 120 million citizens still filing tax returns, and they won't even consider busting these huge crimes that Congress is committing because they're too busy running from boogeymen that never existed. So The website, again, is called taxhonestyprimer.com, all one word. And so I've made, a mark with a few thousand people. They have enjoyed it. They've learned from it. I don't know how many of them have become non-filers or non-taxpayers. I don't care. I just try to tell people what I've seen and learned. I have dealt with 14 agents of the Internal Revenue Service. I have 7 friends, personal friends, one of them is now dead, but 6 friends who used to work for the service. So I know a lot of people who used to work for the IRS. Some of them are very well-known tax honesty spokesmen now, and I mention them on my website. But in 1999, I contacted Michael Thomas at IRS Austin, and Michael evaded my questions and ran away. And the next year, in 2000, I contacted Nancy Sessions at IRS Austin. And she contacted me back to say, I haven't finished my studying this, and I will get back with you. I never heard back from her again. The next year, Beverly Coogan and then Aaron Haymore, both of IRS San Antonio, they took their turn at me, and they both failed to get anything from me, and they both failed to give me anything. And then the next year, it was R.A. Mitchell at IRS Dallas, and then C. Sherwood of IRS Dallas. They both evaded me. In 2004, Grace Metro and Deborah K. Hurst at IRS Dallas filed a notice of federal tax lien against my property. And I took them to a Texas court for fraud under Texas Penal Code 3248, which is fraudulent liens. And it took a year and a half. The judge decided by the end of 2005, he decided to let them walk, but they still didn't take a dime from me when we later sold our home. So they pounded sand. Then in 2006, a very well-known IRS operative from IRS Ogden named Dennis Perizek, he has sent out a lot of terror letters. He tried with me, and he ended up running away. Also, Deborah Egan from IRS Ogden could not answer my questions. Then in 2007, Susan Meredith of IRS Fresno, and then Teresa Webb of IRS Memphis, both failed to answer my questions, ran away, wouldn't answer. And then last but not least, later that year, 2007, I received a couple of very, very half-hearted sort of requests by 2 ladies, Stephanie Borop and Queen Vaughn. That's her actual name, both of IRS Nashville. So those are the 14 people I've dealt with at IRS. I've asked them all the very same thing. Here's the questions. Very simple. Where's the section of law that makes me legally liable for keeping records, filing returns, and paying your demands? Some things are called out as taxable activities in the tax code. In fact, I can find over 100 of them. But most aren't, including my line of work, which is engineering. So show me where the law creates a liability for my own kind of gainful activity, as it does for all those others in the code. That's all. That's what I asked them. I've asked all of these 14 people that over all those years, and they've never answered me. They've always given me one of 2 bogus non-responses, Mark. Here's the first one they use. They say, we haven't finished our research. We'll get back to you. And then you never hear from them again. The second bogus non-response I've received is, we have forwarded your request to the office shown below. And you remember when you were a kid, that was called hot potato. In criminal law, they call it fraud and conspiracy. But I refuse to finance corruption by letting Congress skim my checks. And after 15 years of being very vocal with these 14 people, the DC Al-Qaeda hasn't touched me. They haven't touched my money. They haven't touched my property. The material on my website took me about 7 years to compile, and then 4 or 5 more years to refine it. It takes about 2 hours to read through if you're an average reader. Most people do it by, a piece at a time. They come back to the site many times over weeks or months or whatever. It's a lot to digest. And it's very scary. Expect to be very scared. I was very scared for a couple of years because I didn't have all this kind of stuff. I was having to dig up original documents. I didn't have anybody holding my hand, but I don't offer any tax or legal counseling. I don't charge anything. I don't take any donations for a tax honesty primer. So it's there. It's there for you for free. Enjoy it, learn from it, pass it on to others if you find it useful. And by all means, don't fear your employees.
Well, David, you've given us an awful lot of great stuff to think about, and I know we've got a lot of reading and a lot of good information to get over to your sites and get, and we're going to have links to both of those sites, and we're going to have a link to the specific article, Can America Stop the Cartels, in today's show notes. But now just for the folks listening on iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube that I know a lot of them never actually make it over to the site, so can you just give them the websites one more time?
Yes. This one is taxhonestyprimer.com. One word, taxhonestyprimer, Primer.com. The other website is americaagainnow.com. And just click on the blog and look for that article, Can Americans Stop the Cartels?
Well, David, thanks again for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Mark.
Hey preppers and patriots, American Meltdown, the long-awaited sequel to American Exit Strategy, is now available in Kindle and paperback. In American Meltdown, Book 2 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, the new president, Anthony Howe, signs an executive order banning all semi-automatic weapons. Matt, Adam, and Wesley Baer begin training with their local militia for the battle that is coming. Within weeks of the inauguration, the $700 trillion derivatives bubble pops when rates on U.S. debt skyrocket. The derivatives crisis is the final nail in the coffin of the banking system and the death of the fiat currency system in America. With the dollar gone, commerce comes to a screeching halt. While times prove to be tough for all, survival favors the prepared. Get your Kindle or paperback copy of American Meltdown, Book 2 of the Economic Collapse Chronicles on Amazon today.